Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Civil liberties, what's in it for you? We have two guests with us to discuss this topic. Lois, Perrin, Legal Director of ACLU Hawaii Chapter. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And
Good evening.
Kit Grant, good evening. And Kit Grant, Outreach Director, ACLU of Hawaii. Thanks for coming too.
It's great to be here.
And I must say that I am also, since January 1st of this year, I'm on the board of directors of the ACLU Hawaii chapter, so we have to disclose that. What we're going to be doing is talking about the activities of the ACLU and in terms of defense of civil liberties and civil liberties cases and issues and so on. But before, in 2002, I interviewed Vanessa Chung, was on as a guest on this program, and Wei-Sin Chow with Christy Ejima from law school. Wei-Sin Chow is National Lawyers Guild, and Vanessa Chung is the executive director of the ACLU Hawaii chapter. So we're going to begin with that clip from there, and then we take it. Okay.
Civil Liberties Union on your program tonight. Professor, the mission of the ACLU is to protect and defend the Bill of Rights. We like to say the Bill of Rights is our only client, and our job is to protect and defend those fundamental liberties outlined in the Constitution, known as our Bill of Rights. And we do that through advocacy in the courts, in the legislature, and in the public forum to raise awareness about civil liberties. And thank you for drawing attention to one of our brochures this evening called Know Your Rights. This is part of our public education effort after September 11 to increase awareness among citizens and non-citizens about what their rights are if they come into contact with customs, the INS, and other federal authorities as a result of the government's new actions following September 11th.
Yeah, thanks. And Wei-Sin, you want to tell us something about the National Lawyers Guild?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I'm the head of the National Lawyers Guild Hawaii chapter. Basically, the National Lawyers Guild is a national organization consisting of lawyers, law students, legal assistants, as well as jailhouse lawyers, dedicated to protecting and defending human rights over property rights. Mm-hmm. And basically, we've represented numerous political dissenters and protesters for the last 5, 6, 7 decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to start with that and say, where are we now? And you're the outreach director for the ACLU. Could you tell us something? What else do you do? And then we can go to the cases that the ACLU is involved with.
Sure. Well, first of all, since that time, we're still lucky enough, of course, to have Vanessa Chung as our executive director, and she's wonderful. And under her leadership, we've been able to tackle some pretty significant problems here in Hawaii, and also increase the staffing of the affiliate so that we can do more outreach work with the public. Our legal program is run by Lois Perrin. We also have a legislative program that has a contract staff person that assists us with being actually in the field at the legislature. And also my position, which is fairly new as a full-time position, is to do outreach to the public. So, so the work of the ACLU and the membership of the ACLU has certainly increased a great deal over the last 5 years, and we're just really happy to be here serving Hawaii.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So you mentioned something about Hawaii, but Lois, I want to ask you about the structure of the ACLU nationally, and in that context, where does Hawaii lie in terms of cases and so on?
The way the ACLU is structured, there is a national office which is headquartered in New York. We also have a national legislative office which is obviously headquartered in Washington, D.C. Basically, national sets the policies for all of the affiliates. At this time, we are lucky enough to have an affiliate in every state, although I believe the Dakotas only have one between them. We also have one in Puerto Rico. And for the first time, every affiliate now has a staff lawyer. That's something that has happened post 9/11 and is due in large part to increased public awareness, increased donations, and increased funding for those positions. The way that the local affiliates work is we look to tackle predominantly local issues. The job of the affiliate is to take cases that fall within the parameters of national policy, but to ensure that we're out there as the watchdog to make sure that each individual in each state has his or her rights protected. And so we are tasked to respond to that.
Yeah. And one question might be is how you folks relate to each other in terms of supporting each other's work, since you are the outreach and you are the legal director.
Well, first you have to realize our physical office is quite small. We are a small nonprofit. So we have, is it 5 people now on full-time staff? Yeah. So we work very closely together in close physical proximity. So that's one thing. But in addition, there is a lot of camaraderie in the office. We are constantly talking to each other about all of the different programs, whether it's legislative or public education, outreach, legal. There's a constant debate and dialogue in the office between everybody to figure out how we can best address these issues. Because in an ideal world, we wouldn't address them just in the courts. We would address them in the courts as well as through public education, as well as educating our members to try and raise awareness.
Yeah, and so I called the show like, what's in it for you? Civil liberties, what's in it for you? Because I know, like, from your work in education, you're trying to do outreach, so to make people aware of civil liberties and, you know, as the whole package of civil liberties, that it is important for people to understand what civil liberties are and to protect them and to see the role of citizens in the protection of civil liberties. So how do you do some outreach activities and so forth?
Sure. I would say probably one of the most powerful tools that we have is our field work, which is where, you know, if there's going to be a protest, it doesn't really matter what it's about. You know, very often, as you know, the ACLU doesn't necessarily advocate for the point that's being made by the protesters, but we may be there with an information table just to let people know how to protest peacefully and lawfully. You know, our philosophy is that if you're going to indulge in civil disobedience, you should know where that line is, you know, and as much as possible we try to educate people about that. We also have a lot of materials. We have a speakers bureau, which is our board also helps us with, where we actually go into the schools and into to organizations. There are a couple, you know, Rotary clubs that ask us to come and speak, and so the speakers bureau is very active, and we have actually some participating attorneys that even assist with that effort. And also we have materials that we can send out, so, you know, if a student or organization wants to get copies of, for instance, the Bill of Rights or your right to protest. We have some examples here, like the Bill of Rights, which is probably the classic. You know, this is, as we say, our only client, and, you know, when I give speeches, I always hold this one up and say, okay, this is our client right here. You know, this is about all we need. We also have your right to protest, which is a good one, and this one is actually in both side by side in Hawaiian language and in English. So that's a popular piece that we also can give out. We also have our police contact cards, which are this is a good example of a collaboration between our legal department and our public education department. We had a piece that was made by the national office, and it was really super general, not very specific to Hawaii law, and together with the legal department and our wonderful legal assistant, we managed to turn these into full color, more exciting, and specific to Hawaii law. So the information that you get in these about what to do if you're stopped by the police is actually geared toward Hawaii audiences instead of just being kind of general.
So why, you know, as an attorney, why is this, these two pieces, you know, are important? Why are they important, you know, and how could they be used? Because I can put them in my pocket and then forget about it, you know, but how could it be used?
Well, specifically, the contact cards are nice because when individuals are stopped by the police, there's always the opportunity or the possibility that they were stopped incorrectly. The other thing is that there are a number of things that you can do to protect yourself and your rights once you have been stopped by the police. Some of these are very common sense things, like don't lose your temper, speak very slowly, be sure that you write everything down, maintain your composure. But you may forget that when you've actually been stopped. In addition to that, there are certain time frames. For example, you can only be held for X number of hours before you must be brought before a court. You have X number of hours before you must be allowed to make a phone call. So there's information in here that frankly will help you when you may not be thinking clearly in order to help yourself. So we've done this as a public education tool, and there are two versions, one for adults and also one for juveniles. So, and they are tailored specifically to each age group. And they're really done as an announcement and as a service so that people can carry them around. The other thing that's on the back, which is nice, is that if you have a complaint with respect to the way you've been treated, there's information on how to file a complaint about that incident and allow you to follow up on it.
Okay, that's great. Anything else you want to say on this, or other kinds of services?
Well, we also have information about what to do if you're stopped by the FBI, INS, Customs and Immigration. We have information on everything from LGBT rights to drug reform, to almost any topic that has to do with civil liberties. We'll either have a really great publication that we can get for you, or we may even have it right on hand. So we do get calls, from students and others looking for that kind of stuff.
Someone might ask, why are you troubling yourselves so much? Don't you trust the government? So as an attorney, what would you say?
No.
Oh my gosh.
No, really. The way that I perceive the Constitution, both the Hawaii Constitution and the federal Constitution, is in the nature of a contract. Individuals recognized that they needed to have some form of government in order to rule. However, they also recognized, the people who drafted the constitutions, that we have certain fundamental rights and liberties that cannot be infringed upon by the government. And in order to keep the appropriate balance, you need a watchdog like the ACLU who is very true to the principles that are set in the Constitution, and frankly, that are not persuaded by political agendas one way or the other, which is why we say the true client of ours is the Constitution or the particular federal law that we're trying to enforce at that time. So it's very pure in its ideology, and it's something that we're very dedicated to.
Yeah. Because also, there have been any number of events, incidents in Hawaii's history, but also in the U.S. history, where the government really has violated the U.S. Constitution itself. I mean, we can talk about Nixon, Reagan, and a lot of other people, and the FBI and so on. In fact, the recent thing about the FBI that they violated their own rules and laws.
For the National Security
Yeah, for the National Security Act. So this is a huge thing. So people who might feel patriotic have to really defend the Constitution rather than trust it only to just a few people. And this is very important. So it's important for us in civil liberty activists to really make that point and educate along those lines, I suppose.
And the Bill of Rights is your owner's manual,
right,
and the people own the United States.
That's right.
I think the other thing that's a nice point on that is that organizations like the ACLU and the Constitution, the true value is tested when the American people are in a national security crisis or are in some sort of crisis. Individuals seem perhaps more ready to give up certain civil liberties and civil rights during that time, without recognizing the impact that can have. Once you give them up, you do not get them back very easily. And so it's particularly important to be vigilant about protecting those rights in the name, particularly when we're looking at things within the name of national security.
I have interviewed a professor in ethnic studies and women's studies, Monisha Das Gupta, and I talked with her about a book that she had just came out with called Unruly Immigrants. And this is about South Asians in the continental United States. But she talks about her book, how it was first conceived and then how it turned out to be as a defense or as an investigation of liberties, civil liberties and rights, of individuals living in the United States and not only citizens. So we listened to her, and then perhaps we can comment on it from a civil libertarian point of view.
When I started to work on the project, I thought that I would maybe write about how a South Asian identity emerges in the United States, what is an immigrant identity, but very quickly it moved to issues of rights. And in the book, what I show is how these activists have formulated a notion of rights that moves away from simply demanding citizenship. And so in that way, they challenge citizenship as the only way in which they can demand rights. They try and find ways in which where non-citizens and people who will never become citizens, either because they have crossed into the country illegally or have fallen out of status while being in the country, or even if they have formal citizenship because they are low-wage workers or queer immigrants or battered women, they will never be seen as real citizens, like real members of the national community. So that is what I found very inspiring about their work, and my book basically shows that there's a way to demand rights without having citizenship, that's not a necessary requirement.
So this is an important point because people think, only citizens have rights in the United States, and that's not really true. But before we continue this discussion, we have a caller from the Big Island, from Hilo. Dwight from Hilo. You're on the air, Dwight.
Yes, this is on the Fourth Amendment. I do my own research. I study Constitution, and I go word for word in the Fourth Amendment. It's actually a judicial process, and you need a court to be open 24/7, which, like here in Hilo, the district court is not open 24/7. So if there was a warrant issued, the judge would sign probably at this house, which is illegal. And if there was a return of warrant, the return of warrant, they take them to jail rather than back to the court that actually should be in. So there should be no delay in the process. It's a judicial process.
Okay, let me speak to that. There are a couple of things.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think the question is, does the Fourth Amendment, or your interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, is that the courts be open at all times, and the fact that the district court is not open at all times, does that pose a violation to the Fourth Amendment because people are taken to jail until the court opens? Is that right?
That's right, because that is a judicial process. Your 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment is a court proceeding. There was no police when there was the Fourth Amendment. People don't realize that. Police was created in New York City in 1840. Constitution was already adopted almost 50 years. So what they were talking about is the judicial process, the third party, or the third part of government, which is the judicial branch. And its duty was to protect, they have to go through the judicial process to get search warrant, to search and seize. There's no such thing as a warrantless search because of the Fourth Amendment. It's a violation without a warrant. And they did that when there was no computer, there was no police, there was no modern technology, and they did it back then.
Well, let me actually respond to that last
thanks,
point.
Dwight. Yeah.
The last point first is I think the fact that the Constitution was drafted at a time when there was no technology, for example, there are differing schools of thought on this. Is the Constitution supposed to be a dynamic document? Did the founders and the drafters of the Constitution understand that things would change? Are the principles that are set forth in that document intended to change over time to adapt to the core principle? And I think that they are. So, for example, with searches and seizures, at the time they could not have possibly known that the internet existed. But if you look at an email on the internet, they certainly had postage and mail at the time. They understood that there was a difference between what was written on the outside of the envelope versus what was on the inside of the envelope. So I think the Constitution can be adapted or should be interpreted in a manner in order to give full intent to what the framers intended. With respect to the second question, quickly, I don't think that the Fourth Amendment, the courts are typically open all of the time. The way that that has been interpreted is that you can go to a Dropbox or you can call the clerk of court at any time in order to make your filing deadline. There are cases that allow for the holding of individuals for up to 48 hours in the state of Hawaii until they have to be brought before a judge. While that's something that the ACLU is opposed to and frankly thinks that it should be much sooner, that's the current state of the law right now.
Yeah. But at least the ACLU is trying to point in the right direction and pressure for that.
And actually, with this year, there was a bill introduced in the legislature to even extend that time to 72 hours, which is a bill that we would have opposed. Luckily, it did not get a hearing, and it will now be 48 hours. But there was a move in the legislature to make that time even longer.
So again, like civil liberties, what's in it for you? Well, fewer hours of detention, you see, which is good. I mean, it's something that in everybody's interest to have like due process quickly, rendered and so on. So back though to Monisha, but we have to thank Dwight for his good mana'o. In terms of the question of, for instance, when you do outreach, you don't do it only to citizens, do you do it? You do it to everybody, immigrants, everybody, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so could you speak to that and how Monisha's point relates to activities for civil liberties?
Well, you know, the ACLU's point of view is that if you're in the United States, you deserve the due process of our laws, and you deserve to be, you know, treated with respect. And we do go out in the community and work with. In fact, this this particular document, our Know Your Rights, is translated into probably like 17 languages. We have, you know, everything from Hindi to Vietnamese. And we work as much as possible on getting translations done of these key documents so that people will be able to you know, assert their rights and know that, you know, they're not of some unclear, you know,
Let me give a real life
status.
example of that, if I could.
Sure.
For example, we had a case recently where, and I'm not sure if people recall, the administration, the city's administration, had closed Ala Moana Beach Park on very short notice. And when they did so, they evicted some 200 homeless individuals from Ala Moana. That evening, the homeless individuals, along with a number of supporters of the homeless and advocates for the homeless, marched up to City Hall. When they marched up to City Hall to peacefully protest and exercise their First Amendment rights, they were arrested. And they were actually arrested under a statute that no longer exists and applies only to private property. We ended up bringing a lawsuit on behalf of some of the individuals who stayed and who engaged in peaceful protest. Most individuals, when the police told them to leave, left. And that's simply because people didn't understand that it was their right to stay there. They were absolutely constitutionally entitled to be there, so long as they were peaceful, and they were. Of our clients, not all of them were U.S. citizens. There was an individual who was what's called a lawful permanent resident, and that does not change the fact at all that his rights, First Amendment rights, are the same as anybody else's in this country. There is not a difference of legal analysis whatsoever. The case is just simply brought.
Yeah, and here's another case, live example of how you can't trust the government, you know. They violate the Constitution just to make it easier on them. I mean, this is a good case. But from your experiences, like, why would the police not know about the law? Or, you know?
I think the unfortunate reality with that is that with trespass laws in particular, there has been a move in this state for the last 2 or 3 years to pass laws directed at the homeless. People don't want them on their beaches. People don't want them on their parks. They want tools to be able to move the homeless from one public place to another. Because there have been a number of changes, unfortunately, it's not trickling down to the police department in the way that I believe that it should. And so individuals are not being trained. There's also a misunderstanding on the part of the advocates about what the changes in the law have been, as well as by members of the homeless population. There really is a lot of confusion. I testified a couple weeks ago about another one of these trespass laws, and it was apparent to me that every person at the hearing really had some fundamental misunderstanding of what the scope of the laws are, what the scope is, and whether it applies to certain people. So I do think that there is a need for appropriate training on trespass laws, not just to law enforcement, but also to the individuals against whom the law is going to be enforced.
Yeah. So in terms of outreach, what do we do to fix that or help fix it?
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the things that we were talking about in the office, like what's the best way to approach this kind of, level of misunderstanding. And I think one of the things we wanted to try was to do more outreach to the groups that actually work directly with and have the trust of the homeless population, and also to continue working with law enforcement to make sure that, that the training is right. But, barring that, of course, our first goal is always, to educate. If possible, then we change the law or we prevent bad laws from getting passed. Worst case scenario is we go to court again.
But particularly when you're talking about, for example, the homeless or immigrants or other groups that are very insular and difficult to reach, this is where we really need to focus a lot of our outreach efforts. And a lot of our clients tend to be these marginalized groups. The Constitution's value, again, is only as worthy as it is to those who are on the fringes.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of our education is not just to those groups directly, but also to others to understand the plight that is suffered by these groups. Because the key to understanding civil liberties, I think, is education and really a good appreciation of what the basic concepts are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other points on that? I mean, like, for instance, the legislative committee. We have a legislative committee, right?
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
So have they been doing work on that particular issue to make sure, like, people get trained better, officers of the law get trained better. People at, City Hall, for instance. I mean, why did the mayor allow this to happen, to arrest him? Was he at home then, or where was he? Or he just got rid of the problem? So, anyone?
Well, let me answer that twofold, actually. The first is that the case that we brought about the individuals who were protesting at City Hall was settled very quickly, and part of that settlement was a memorandum that went to the Honolulu Police Department that explained that the law that they used was not applicable to public property, that individuals have the right to be on City Hall grounds. Another part of that settlement was, I think for the first time ever, a joint statement between the City and County of Honolulu, as well as the ACLU, that expressly reaffirmed that City Hall is open to all on an equal basis, independent of the content of your message or the identity of the messenger. Right. The other thing that that statement did was talked about the different things that the city has done to address the homeless problem in order to come up with creative solutions. And so that was one thing that we did. At the legislature, the testimony that I gave, the testimony that the police gave, the testimony given by public housing, I think really highlighted for the legislators the fact that there was this need for training. And so there was active discussion amongst the different individuals in the House and in the Senate. Hopefully that'll trickle down, and we've certainly started discussions on how we can better train HPD. I think that that's something the city should be interested in because it will avoid future lawsuits.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, why would they want to have another headache?
Right.
Just to avoid some difficulty, which is a fleeting difficulty, Right. What I want to do is I want to go to a segment by Monisha Dasgupta again to talk about how citizens, the rights are interpreted in a different way for citizens and non-citizens by the powers that be, and by some people who do not understand. Even some activists, do not understand what the laws are and might be committing this sin, so to speak, of sacrificing the right for non-citizens because they think the Constitution applies only for citizens. So when it's ready, we roll.
I think it was, in 1870 that it was clarified that indeed the Bill of Rights is something, except for voting rights, is not something that can only be enjoyed by citizens. So freedom of speech, freedom of association, these things were also due to non-citizens. Anybody residing in the United States could enjoy these rights. However, as we see historically, that particular interpretation has come under challenge, especially in times where the country is perceived to be under threat security-wise. So national security concerns have always undercut or undermined these rights, and I think that those are the moments when these civil rights or the rights, constitutional rights, are seen as rights that are primarily entitled to citizens, and whether non-citizens are entitled to those rights or not is called into question. Even more interestingly, as you know, during after Pearl Harbor with the Japanese-American incarceration, even the Nisei, their enjoyment of those rights was challenged. Mm-hmm. So the national security becomes sort of a flashpoint that determines whether indeed these rights apply to non-citizens or not, and I think that that's what we are working out in this moment post 9/11.
Yeah, so many things have changed also post 9/11. Yeah, I mean on the local level, like in terms of outreach activities, education, and so on. Are there some of those activities dedicated or targeting the question of homeland security issues and post 9/11 things regarding immigrants or even citizens for that matter?
Absolutely. I would say, as Lois had said, our affiliate is generally tasked with responding to local issues especially in terms of our legal program and our legislative program. With outreach, though, sometimes we do get requests from the national ACLU for these sort of 50-state initiatives on certain civil liberties issues that have a completely national impact. whereas the work of our legal department may trickle up to the national level. For instance, with the outreach program, we actually have been active on the NSA, the National Security Agency spying issue. We've been active also on Real ID, which is a national identity card system that have tremendous impact nationally, but we were asked if we could, try to gather some support and make some actions locally on those. And we're always happy to do that if we can.
Yeah, sure. And we're going to be talking more about Real ID in a bit. But other things you can think of from your perspective as an attorney?
I think it's important to emphasize that National has specific projects that have come up post 9/11. One of them is the Keep America Safe and Free campaign, and this is to address things like the USA Patriot Act, as well as NSA spying and some other issues that have come up there. There's also a new immigrants' rights project, which was actually the impetus for which was 9/11 and the different problems that arose post 9/11. And so those are issues that are being worked on by the national ACLU, these specific projects. And to the extent that those issues percolate in our state, we of course can go to the national ACLU and ask for their assistance, and we have done that. We have not done that with respect to that particular issue, the immigrants' rights issue, but we have done it in the past with regard to other issues. So just by way of example, and this is not a 9/11 issue, but when we brought a case about the abuse, discrimination, and harassment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender teens at the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility, I wanted some expertise from national LGBT lawyers and went and pitched the project to National, and ultimately National came in as our co-counsel and gave us the resources that we needed as well as the expertise to bring that case and to ultimately get a terrific result in that case, the first case ever in the country to address out-of-home care for LGBT kids. And we won, and it's a terrific case. It's a precedent-setting case, and one that we really could not have done without National's assistance.
Yeah. So, I mean, these things like impacts everyone. I mean, LGBT and others and immigrants and so on. And for instance, do you have contact with other groups, civil libertarian, or groups who fight for the U.S. Constitution or for rights for immigrants, etc.? Are there some kind of cooperation, collaboration, or exchange of information? So if you could tell us more about those things.
Well, sure. We're always happy to hear from groups that do that type of work. Locally, we just did some Real ID actions with some support from Naloyo, which is for Immigration Council.
Yeah.
And also from the Americans for Democratic Action. Even though the ACLU itself is nonpartisan, we will partner with whatever groups and who may have a similar concern to get the word out. So we are all about coalition building, and certainly always welcome those groups into the fold.
It's also important to underscore the point we said a couple of times here, which is the question of the Bill of Rights is the most important thing, and that is the client for the ACLU. And regardless of whether somebody is on the right wing or the left wing or in the center, it doesn't matter. What matters is the question of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And we cannot overemphasize this because there's some kind of notion that the ACLU is like someone who doesn't believe in the Constitution or makes life difficult for the politicians or something like that. So just it's important to lay that to rest, that kind of thought. So there are a number of cases that you have been involved in the state of Hawaii, and we were talking about one case about the homeless. Could you say more about the specific case of a particular person, perhaps you might want to mention?
Well, the clients, there were two cases actually that were brought. The first was brought on behalf of two protesters that evening, Julia Matsui Estrella and Utu Langi. Both of these individuals are advocates for the homeless. They were not only arrested that evening, they were taken to jail. And the prosecutor refused to drop the charges for some period of time, even though it was apparent from the documents that they had been arrested under a statute that didn't exist. Then Julia's son had the brilliant idea of actually videotaping the entire arrest. So we had the police officers on tape saying, "You're being arrested under this statute," and they gave the numbers. And a statute that doesn't exist. So that was terrific for us. The other thing that happened was that in the month following the arrests, individuals to support the homeless and the fact that the city had not come up with adequate alternatives for the homeless protested outside on the sidewalks of City Hall grounds, and they were told that they needed to leave. Now what's fascinating is that other groups, when they were protesting on City Hall grounds, were allowed to stay. And so it was very clear that they didn't want advocates for the homeless protesting on City Hall's doorstep. And so we brought that second suit on behalf of Reverend Bob Nakata, Reverend Sam Cox, and the Interfaith Alliance, who were some of the members that were out protesting. And the basic message was, if you're going to allow individuals to protest at City Hall, you have to allow them regardless of whether you agree with their message and regardless of who they are. So again, the city settled those cases very quickly. And gave a statement that City Hall is now open to everybody on an equal basis, and so we're thrilled with the decision.
Yeah, but I'm kind of curious about how come the city prosecutor,
Yes,
how,
Peter Carlisle.
yeah.
Why didn't they drop the charges?
Why wouldn't he drop the charges? I don't think he's ignorant of the law.
I think ultimately when push came to shove, they did drop the charges, but it took us filing a motion to dismiss in a criminal case, and it's pretty rare for the ACLU to get involved in a criminal case. So frankly, awareness should have been raised when the ACLU letterhead came flying across Peter Carlisle's desk with a 7-page detailed letter of all the reasons why they should drop the case. I don't know. I think unfortunately it fell through the cracks for a period of time. Once Peter Carlisle paid attention to it, it was quickly dropped. And so I think it was just because the charge was a misdemeanor charge and it wasn't particularly high on the list. It had been assigned down to a very junior prosecutor.
Okay, and so he messed up with the law, or
I think it took a long time to get the approval to drop the case, and that people should have moved a little bit more quickly, but ultimately they did move, and we ended up getting the result that we wanted.
So you attribute it to bureaucracy, or?
I do attribute some of it to bureaucracy. Unfortunately, justice is often much slower, which actually, that brings me to another point, which is the legal program, and we can talk about all of the cases that we've brought, but for me and for our particular affiliate, it's really negotiate first and sue last, because justice does take an incredibly long time. Litigations are often 18 months or longer, and that's just in the trial court level. From there, you have to go on an appeal. In the state courts, that could be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. In the Ninth Circuit, that could be anywhere from 9 months to a year and a half. So we're looking at 3 to 5 years in some cases before you can actually get a result that you can depend on as being final. A lot of the work that we do is to try and avoid going through all of that in the first instance. By going to the city and county, for example, and saying, we should settle this because it's going to benefit every individual in Honolulu to know that City Hall is open. Or going to the state and saying, we should settle this because it's going to benefit not just the kids at the youth correctional facility now, but it's going to benefit all kids that have to go there in the future. And actually, in that particular case, it's benefiting kids on the mainland, since it was the first case. People are looking to that case as a model. But again, I really do want to say that we do sue infrequently. It's probably only 4 or 5 times a year at the most. And that's when all other efforts have failed and we have been unable to reach an agreement in order to vindicate people's civil rights.
Yeah, actually, it's wise to avoid the courts, getting there. It's wise if you can solve it amicably or, with a lot of persuasion. Yeah. But the other thing I was thinking as we are talking now is that the case where the city messed up, actually 2 cases, right, messed them up, would be a good kind of educational tool to have outreach about those kinds of cases, to educate, maybe do things with the police, like some activities with the police on that, or to ask the police at some point, well, what have they done to make sure that the police doesn't arrest anybody on this law that does not exist, or at least does not apply to such cases, something.
We're definitely very open to working with law enforcement on the public education side. In fact, we're hoping that as we do more work with our police contact cards, these little pocket card things, that eventually that we can even get some folks from law enforcement to come out with us and talk about it, talk about your rights and that sort of thing. So we're trying to build those relationships, and I'm fairly new to the job, but I know that with determination and finding the right people, you can always make a connection.
Which leads me to think, did the police see this?
Oh yeah, actually we worked with a person in the family court for the youth version, and also with, we actually called all the numbers that are on here and talked to them.
Because I think the police probably would benefit from that too, so
Absolutely.
that they know what to do. Because they're human, and if they are not especially trained very well, which they should be, then they can make sure that they don't make certain faux pas that are included here that you shouldn't do. So I was just wondering about that, but I think the outreach effort is really critical. Leads me to another thing. In fact, I was talking with a few students on campus who are interested in having a chapter of ACLU on campus. So we can talk more about that later on.
There are student chapters at a number of different universities, so that's something that can easily be done.
That's good, because sometimes what happens is certain issues, let me put it this way, occur on campus, and you have to have at least some kind of presence for the ACLU here to give advice to students and so on.
Actually, that would be great, because I have had a constant stream of different complaints that have come in from UH since I've been here. The problem that I have found is that there hasn't been a critical mass. There hasn't been sort of an organization or an appointed leader to address some of these problems. So the complaints tend to be sporadic without a lot of follow-up, and we could do a lot more work on this campus if we had a student organization that would assist us in putting together the necessary facts and the necessary information.
That would be a good project, for...
That'd be a lot of fun.
For the two of you together, to collaborate on that. I'll be willing to help.
We've worked with some folks from the political science department already. We did a webcast viewing party up at Sanders Hall.
Saunders,
which is named after our founder, ACLU of Hawaii's founder, Alan Saunders. So that was great. So the stuff that we've done on the campus has always been super fun, and we really love the energy that young people bring.
So that's good, because some students are concerned about a number of issues as they talk to me about it. Yeah. But the other thing, could you give an example of one of those things that fell into the cracks?
One of the things that I heard a lot of complaints about is campus security, and the fact that campus security, for example, actually is using some of these trespass laws inappropriately to ban individuals from the campus. I've also heard that they are acting outside of their authority with respect to the different manuals. The problem that I've had is that when I ask for specific examples, I get a smattering of complaints here and there and zero follow-up. So it's left me at a point where there's nothing that I can do.
Follow-up from whom? I'm sorry.
From the students.
From the students,
right.
Yeah. Are these recent examples, or how recent are these?
Some are as recent as December of this year, of last year. Others led to the request for an audit with regard to the campus security in a legislative briefing that was done, I believe, last May, but I'd have to check the dates on that to be specific. I've also heard issues about where students are allowed to protest. We've gotten complaints about that, whether it can be in certain class buildings and in certain classrooms. As well as there was, of course, a lot of issues surrounding UARC.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Because some of this, the cases you're talking about, I've heard, especially the ones like last December. And in fact, I heard at this point that the students gave up on things, and because there was no movement, etc. And especially when the leadership of the university is about to have another change, we have an interim chancellor, and that interim chancellor is leaving, and then we have the assistant, the vice chancellor for academic affairs. He's gonna be leaving, I think, in June or something. So the students basically dropped those. They gave up because they said, the leadership on campus is not doing anything about it, even though they tried quite a bit to do something with that. So this kind of as I was talking with the students, I said, okay, maybe then it'd be good to have an ACLU chapter on campus. Yeah. So these are kind of, to me, I mean, I teach here, are disturbing to me, because if it is the recipients of this law and order business are the students whom we teach and whom we should take care of, and without whom there would be no real nobody to teach, you know. I mean, there'll be no professors. They might be doing research but not teaching. Yeah, so I think that's important.
ACLU chapter would be important. You know, again, we're a very small office. We only have 5 people that are on staff. I am the only lawyer actually that's on staff, and so we are limited in what we can do primarily by resources, both human and financial.
Sure.
So with only 5 people, we need individuals who are willing to do a lot of the groundwork. We simply, I simply can't be
Absolutely.
in 12 places. I need other people to come to me to be able to put the information together. From there, we can solicit, you know, volunteer attorneys. We can engage in, you know, active negotiations, regardless of whether there's going to be a change in leadership or not. Just because there's a change in leadership does not mean that the leadership does not owe certain things to its student body.
Absolutely.
And so that should be going on, even if there is an impending change.
Yeah, and now I am more disturbed about it because security is arresting people or trying to evict people from campus based on laws that are what, faulty laws or do not
That
exist?
only apply to
or,
private property.
Okay, absolutely,
and-
that's excellent.
Right, and so that's a concern that I've had for some period of time.
Here's another one for the outreach committee. I mean, not all together, but you know, I mean, campus security. Maybe we should talk with them about what needs to be done and how they should educate their own security people, and to be cognizant of these laws and that these things don't apply to something like the University of Hawai'i that sits on ceded land, for crying out loud, too. You know, that's another thing. Yeah. So anyway, so I was just thinking out loud on those. Anything else that we want to bring up now?
There's actually one thing. We've been talking a lot about our cases and the work that we do with regard to the Bill of Rights. And of course, the
Right.
Bill of Rights is only the federal Constitution. And I do want to emphasize that our work is beyond the Bill of Rights and the federal Constitution. Several cases that we have brought deal specifically with the Hawai'i Constitution. And sometimes the outreach and training that we need to do is not just to the individuals, but sometimes, in fact, to the legislators themselves. One of the cases that we brought was a constitutional amendment that was not passed in accordance with the Constitution. So we had to bring a case to inform the legislature that they had not read the Constitution properly. You know, we ultimately won that case, which was terrific, but our efforts are not just you know, we're going up against the government and the government is fighting us on our positions. What they had did in that particular case was at the very last moment, at the 11th hour, they switched a regular statute to a constitutional amendment, and that meant that people had no notice of it, no opportunity to comment on it, and then it was supposed to just go to the people on the ballot.
Yeah, because there are two things here. One is that the Hawaii Constitution should be consonant with the U.S. Constitution, but you know, I mean, isn't that true?
There's a portion of the Hawaii Constitution that adopts the federal Constitution for all
Right,
intents and purposes.
right.
And the general rule is the federal Constitution sets the floor, but the Hawaii Constitution can set the ceiling. And so one of the most important things about the Hawaii Constitution is that we have a specific right to privacy. And so we have traditionally had more protection for our privacy rights and for our civil liberties here in this state than they would otherwise provide federally.
Yeah.
The unfortunate reality is that there are certain individuals who are on a campaign to federalize Hawaii law. And so every year in the legislature and in the courts, we're constantly fighting against eroding that particular privacy right and other rights and trying to keep this heightened protection.
Yeah, so the Hawaii Constitution can extend,
Absolutely.
but cannot contradict. That's what I was
Right.
talking about.
But
yeah,
it is important
right.
for people to realize that, you know, we do have a specific privacy right. It was, and it's not that long ago. It was in 1978 that it was created. Individuals knew what they were doing. They intended to give people those additional rights.
Right. So, did you want to say something?
Nope.
Yeah, okay. So, I want to go to Monisha Dasgupta again. And this clip is important in terms of, you know, how sometimes citizens' rights are violated because of racism, perhaps, because if you look like somebody else, not American, because American is white, that kind of notion, then your rights as citizen might be violated as well. So we can go to that and then discuss more.
In certain cases, even citizenship doesn't protect you, right? So if you're a naturalized citizen, especially, then it's just because of your ethnic racial origin, where you come from geopolitically, you can be just stripped of your rights because somehow you're not seen as a real citizen or a real patriotic citizen, that your intentions towards the nation can be called into question. So I think that for me and my work, and for the activists whom I work with, for them, I think that it has become increasingly citizenship. They're becoming increasingly disenchanted with citizenship and its ability, to protect rights. So I think one of the questions that confronts us today in terms of all these civil liberties litigation that are going on by the Center for Constitutional Rights is whether to clarify once again whether non-citizens are entitled to these rights, whether national origin should be a consideration in determining people's rights, or whether we're going to go with the more sort of strict and constrained definition of rights. And I think that's what's interesting about all the cases and the litigation.
Well, I mean, here again, we can talk about 911 and post 911 and so on, because this is a major concern not only for professors and activist professors, but to human beings, whether they are going to the airport or whether they just getting mixed up with somebody who is quote unquote illegal, which I like to call undocumented person. Anything that you can say about that and what the ACLU is doing?
Sure, a few things. This is what we would call racial profiling for the most part. Right. This is an issue that we have been tackling for a number of years, pre-9/11 as well. The ACLU of Northern California was instrumental in bringing what was basically driving while black. And it was a pattern of individuals, black individuals, who were being arrested in white neighborhoods because they were in the wrong place. They were in a wealthy neighborhood and they were driving a new car and they were black, and the assumption was they couldn't afford it. And they certainly didn't live there. So individuals were pulled over and stopped, and they were incredibly successful in a settlement that came out of that case. And there were other cases like that were brought. Post 9/11, the things that we're looking at are really racial profiling in the name of national security. So we see things, for example, now at the airports, and the NYCLU, which was the local affiliate for New York, brought a case with regard to the New York subway system when they started doing random searches based on racial profiling. Unfortunately, that case was not successful. I think it was thrown out, and I don't recall exactly the reason why. The national project, and Kit can probably talk to this, has also been very active in these sort of racial profiling. And I just want to comment on the CCR, which is the Center for Constitutional Rights, wonderful organization. And they're doing a lot of work, and CCR and the ACLU nationally do collaborate on a number of issues, both in public education outreach as well as on briefs in the courts.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, outreach, also like National Lawyers Guild, I know nationally, and here as well, because like Vanessa and Wes and Chow know each other, and they probably collaborate on at least educational issues and so on, since not too many cases or any case around that issue of national security here. Or am I wrong? Are there cases here?
Not that I'm aware of.
We've received complaints, originally when TSA was starting to do, when they had different lists that were available, and the ACLU had been looking at that, like the no-fly list, and there was, the TRIPS list, and there were other lists that the ACLU nationally was looking at. They have changed some of the regulations on that. We did get some complaints, although it was really only a handful. The majority of complaints were coming from California, from what I recall, and the ACLU of Northern California was tracking those in connection with national.
Yeah. Now I think we're gonna talk about Real ID.
I have just one super quick point on that, which is that the National ACLU actually operates a hotline where if you think that your traffic or police stop was based on race or ethnicity, there's actually a 1-800 number that you can call, and you can file a complaint directly with the National ACLU
and
as
then
well.
They can call the ACLU here to figure
they
out.
Would, they would then confer with us,
Sure. Again, I have a clip with Monisha talking about the national ID. Okay, so the real ID, I suppose. We'll watch and then we'll discuss it.
There has been a lot of concern about instituting the government's efforts to institute a national ID on the left. And it's very interesting to watch the debates on the left. And I think that for me, further, underlines the ways in which citizenship keeps, being privileged as, it's the citizens' rights that are the most important to protect is what I get from that debate. Because the way in which the national ID debate is going on the left, people are opposed to it because it's not always possible by physical appearance to figure out whether a person is an alien or whether that person is a citizen in a multi-racial, multi-ethnic society like the United States. So people are concerned that they'll have to carry a national ID, because they might look like an alien and might be mistaken as an alien. And so the concern is that this compromises the rights of citizens. So in some ways, the rights battles are always fought on the ground of the citizens being the privileged subjects. So if the citizens see that their rights are being compromised, only then does it become an issue.
Well, here we go. I mean, the national ID or real ID has more than one aspect to it. So you have like quite an expertise on real ID. So could you tell us
Sure.
more
Just
about that?
very briefly, real ID was a provision that's meant to be anti-terrorism, driver's license reform, and immigration reform sort of all rolled up into one. And it is to the ACLU, it is the rotten fruit of a poison tree. It was passed without any hearings in the Senate, no hearings in the House, no input from the public, and the Department of Homeland Security, which would be the overseer of Real ID operations, has issued guidelines for the program that show that not only is it an unfunded $29 billion program, but it would also expose everyone in the United States to tremendous threat of identity theft. It would also open us up to racial profiling and other deep concerns. So it's a program that's of grave concern to the ACLU, and so one that we testified on the legislature. And there's actually a Senate concurrent resolution that's just crossed over to the House, which is Senate concurrent resolution 31 or Senate resolution 13, introduced by Lorraine Inouye, and we would definitely encourage everyone to support that and to support it. In fact, Real ID is of such a cry in the nation now that our own Senator Akaka, together in a bipartisan effort with John Sununu, has introduced a bill to repeal the driver's license reform portion of Real ID, which would effectively kill it.
Because that's something, civil liberties, what's in it for you? I mean, that one, right? I mean, it's important for people in Hawaii. So is there anything you want to say, Lois, about Monisha's point in terms of people objecting to Real ID because like it would confuse them with non-citizens,
The point that I took was that individuals are not passionate about civil rights until it's going to affect them, and this really goes to the outreach, the outreach effort, and why it is so important to make sure we reach individuals, because it's individuals feeling like they might be treated like the alien that is making individuals protest or oppose this particular bill. Frankly, people should be offended by this bill anyway, and that's what our mission is to ensure that they're educated to understand why the bill is offensive in any form.
Yeah. Good. So you keep working, and good luck with the Real ID issue. And I hope Senator Inouye, Lorraine Inouye, etc., gets that passed. Or what's the status of that now?
It's passed over to the House, so hopefully it'll go further. And there may be a public information briefing coming up sometime before the middle of April.
Okay.
People could check the website at the legislature for that.
Good. And then they will have the committees meet and deal with it. Okay. So thanks, Kit, for coming, and
Thank
thanks,
you, Ibrahim.
Lois, and thanks to our viewers, and see you next month.